You booked a quiet weekend getaway, but the neighbor watches you sleep. The basement door opens on its own, and something is breathing just outside the window. These aren't just creepy coincidences, they're real stories from people who barely made it out. Welcome to High Scary Stories, where true Airbnb nightmares come to life. Hit subscribe now, and remember, not every guest leaves, and not every host is human. Let's begin, if you're brave enough to stay the night. Story 1. The Host in the Walls. I used to be the kind of person who laughed at horror movies. The girl running up the stairs instead of out the door, the couple who ignored the creepy warning signs, I'd roll my eyes and mutter, that would never be me. I grew up in a city always surrounded by people's street noise and the comforting glow of traffic lights outside my window. Fear was something you read about, not something you lived through. But that was before the weekend in the mountains, before the Airbnb that looked too perfect to question, before the host with the kind smile and eyes that never quite blinked right. I thought I was careful. I read every review, messaged the owner twice, double-checked the listing. Everything seemed normal. But now, whenever someone asks me why I never use Airbnb anymore, I just say this: some places are meant to be lived in. Others were never meant to be found. It was a 3-day weekend, and my college friends and I needed a break. There were 4 of us: Maya, Jonah, Tiff, and me. We'd all scattered after graduation, but every year we made it a point to reconnect. This time, Tiff suggested we escape the noise and rent a cabin up in the Appalachians. She found one on Airbnb that looked straight out of a lifestyle magazine: wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, a porch swing that overlooked the valley. The listing was called "The Nest, Cozy Secluded," perfect for small groups. The reviews were glowing, with only the occasional mention of the host being hands-on. We didn't think much of it. The drive up was gorgeous winding roads, dense pine forests, deer darting across the gravel. We arrived just before sunset. The house looked even better in person. It sat tucked between 2 hills, no neighbors in sight, just a stretch of trees that swayed with the wind. The host, a man named Franklin, met us as we pulled in. He wore a red flannel jeans and a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Said he lived in the guest house a few yards behind the main cabin and would give us space. We thanked him, unloaded the car, and settled in. The inside was warm, rustic, with flickering candles already lit and a faint smell of pine. It felt like we had stepped out of the world. We had no idea how much we'd come to regret that. That first night passed easily. We drank wine on the porch, played cards by the fire, and let the quiet wrap around us like a blanket. It was the kind of silence you forget exists when you live in a city, the kind that feels thick, like the trees are listening. Around midnight, we all turned in. I took the room on the first floor closest to the kitchen, while the others headed upstairs. At some point in the night, I woke to a faint sound, like footsteps, but muffled. I assumed it was one of my friends going to the bathroom. But when I cracked my door open, the hallway was empty. The stairs didn't creak. The fireplace had long burned out. I shrugged it off and went back to bed. The next morning, as we sipped coffee on the porch, Maya mentioned something strange. She said she'd heard whispering just outside her window around 3 a.m. Not voices exactly, more like breathy muttering. Jonah joked that the forest spirits were saying hello. We laughed it off, but I noticed how Maya didn't laugh with us. Instead, she stared at the tree line like she was waiting for something to step out. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. New place, thin walls. That afternoon, we hiked a short trail that looped behind the property. The air was crisp and clean, and for a while, the weirdness of the night faded. We came back muddy and starving, made pasta, and played music while Tiff dug through a stack of old vinyl records we found in the corner cabinet. The mood lightened again until just after midnight. We were winding down when the power flickered, just once. The lights dimmed, the music slowed like a warped cassette, and then everything snapped back. We paused, exchanged glances, and Jonah joked that Franklin needed to pay his electric bill. But then I noticed something. The front door, which I'd locked earlier, was cracked open, only by an inch, but wide enough to feel wrong. I shut it, locked it again, and checked the windows. Nothing else seemed disturbed. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The air inside felt off. I kept thinking I heard something soft, like breathing, but from the wall behind the bed, not the room. Around 3 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and froze in the hallway. There was a draft coming from the coat closet. It didn't make sense, there were no vents in there. Curious and a little uneasy, I opened the door. Inside was the usual stuff coats, a dusty umbrella, an old broom. But the back panel of the closet looked loose. A small sliver of light seeped out from the edge. I leaned in. The panel shifted when I pressed against it. Behind it, I found a narrow crawl space just wide enough for a person to slide through. My heart hammered. I didn't go in, but I saw enough: a blanket, a stack of granola wrappers, and a yellowed sketchbook. One of the pages was open. It was a pencil drawing of someone sleeping. Not just anyone, Maya. Same bun, same sweatshirt, same exact pose from the night before. I stepped back, closed the panel, and didn't say a word. Not yet. I just went back to bed and stared at the ceiling until morning. The next morning, I pulled Jonah aside and told him everything: the crawl space, the drawing, the food wrappers. His face went pale, and for once, he didn't have a joke. We waited until the others were out on the porch before sneaking back to the closet. I showed him the panel and pushed it open. The crawl space was still there, still silent, but the sketchbook was gone. We both stepped back in unison. "We need to leave," Jonah whispered. I nodded. But before we could gather our things, Maya called out from the living room, her voice sharp. "Did one of you mess with the Bluetooth speaker?" We came out to find her, holding it confused. The device had been playing a soft, static noise, not music, just low hissing. Then it stopped. No one had touched it. Tiff said she thought she saw something in the hallway earlier, but assumed it was me. That's when I decided to check the kitchen security camera. It was an old model mounted above the pantry, probably just there for insurance purposes. I opened the app the host had mentioned on check-in and replayed footage from the night before. At 3:14 a.m., we saw it. A figure emerged silently from the hallway closet. Tall, wearing dark clothes. He moved to each bedroom door and stood outside them for several seconds. Then just as silently, he vanished back into the wall. My stomach turned cold. It was Franklin, the host, watching us. From inside the house, we didn't pack. We ran. Keys in hand, we left everything: backpacks, food, even our shoes, and bolted for the car. No one said a word as we peeled down the gravel road, the trees blurring past like shadows chasing us. Once we hit signal, we called the police and sent everything: screenshots, video clips, our location. By the time they got there, the crawl space was empty. Franklin was gone. So was the guest house behind the cabin, abandoned, stripped clean, not a single personal item left behind. Airbnb removed the listing within days, and none of us ever heard back from them. I don't know if they found him. I don't know if they even tried. But I still check behind closet panels in every place I stay, hotel or not. And every time I fall asleep, I wonder if someone's just waiting behind the wall, sketchbook in hand, watching, listening, waiting to step out. Story 2. The Ritual Neighbors. It started with a note. A single piece of paper folded neatly left on our porch in the early morning dew. At first, we thought it was a welcome letter from the Airbnb host, something cute or thoughtful. But when I opened it, the words chilled me. Thank you for your participation. You have been seen. You have been blessed. That was it. No signature, no explanation. My wife and I stared at each other, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. We had booked the place to get away from noise, from work stress, and the endless digital chatter of city life. A quiet cabin near the edge of a sleepy mountain town, tucked among tall pines and winding roads. No service, no distractions. It was supposed to be peace. Instead, it became the most disorienting weekend of our lives. Looking back, I do not think we were ever alone, not even for a minute. We had been planning the trip for months. My wife, Erin, and I both work high-stress jobs in the city. She's a nurse. I do software consulting. And the burnout had been slowly closing in. So when we found a quiet A-frame cabin listed on Airbnb just outside a little mountain town called Barrows Hollow, it felt like the perfect escape. The listing promised solitude, scenic views, and no Wi-Fi. That last part was a selling point. The photos showed a beautiful modern interior with rustic touches, wood beams, a fireplace, a lofted bedroom, and a porch overlooking a wide patch of forest. The host's name was Marla. Her bio said she lived in town but was available if anything came up. The place had dozens of 5-star reviews, most of them mentioning how peaceful it was and how the nights were almost too quiet. We drove up Friday morning, winding through back roads and watching the cell signal drop bar by bar. The town itself was tiny, one gas station, a diner, a general store. Everyone seemed polite but distant. When we pulled into the driveway, the air felt heavy still. The trees surrounded the cabin so densely, it was hard to tell where the forest ended. The key was in the lockbox, just like the instructions said. We let ourselves in, unloaded our bags, and settled into what we hoped would be a weekend of sleep, coffee, and silence. For a while, it was exactly that. Until the neighbors came out at night. That first evening was uneventful. We made pasta, opened a bottle of wine, and sat out on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. The quiet was almost surreal. No cars, no buzzing lights, no city sounds. Just cicadas and wind. Around 9 p.m., I noticed a flicker of movement through the trees to our right. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer. But then I saw the faint glow of candlelight. Erin followed my gaze. "Neighbors?" she asked. I nodded slowly, unsure. The neighboring house was maybe 60 yards away, barely visible through the dense brush. We hadn't seen it earlier, not when we arrived or when we looked out during the day. Now, though, there were people out back, 2 figures, a man and a woman. They were arranging something on the ground. From our angle, it was hard to tell, but the candlelight revealed a pattern, a circle, or maybe a star. The man knelt to draw something in the dirt. The woman laid down what looked like feathers or twigs. Erin muttered, "That's weird," and we both laughed it off. Rural folks may be into some spiritual thing. But as we watched longer, I started to feel cold. Not from the wind, from something else. We stayed on the porch longer than we should have, half fascinated, half unsettled. The couple didn't speak. They just moved in quiet synchrony, placing objects into their candlelit circle, more feathers, what looked like small bones, and a glass jar filled with something dark. Then they sat cross-legged across from each other, hands resting on their knees, faces completely blank. Aaron whispered, "Let's go inside." I didn't argue. We drew the curtains, tried to laugh it off, and finished our wine on the couch. But when we went to bed, I couldn't sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard something low, murmuring, rhythmic and strange. I got up across the room quietly and peeked through the bedroom window. The couple was in our yard now, not near their house, ours. They had recreated the same formation, but this time with a triangle and a strange symbol etched in the grass. I watched as they moved their arms in slow ritualistic patterns. Their lips were moving, though I couldn't hear what they were saying. Erin woke to the sound of my breath catching. She joined me at the window, and when she saw them, she whispered, "Why are they doing this here?" I didn't have an answer. We didn't confront them. We didn't call out. Something in our bones told us not to. Instead, we checked every lock, every window, and sat in silence until the candlelight outside slowly faded. By morning, they were gone. Their yard looked untouched. The grass in our yard, however, still bore the faint outline of the triangle. And in the middle of it, placed carefully on the lawn, was a folded piece of paper weighed down by a small stone. Erin refused to touch it. I picked it up, hands trembling. The same message as before. "Thank you for your participation. You have been seen. You have been blessed." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next one either. Because from that moment on, I knew something had started. And I had no idea how to make it stop. We tried to rationalize it the next day. Maybe it was some local tradition, some backwoods version of mindfulness or neo-pagan ceremony. But the way they had crossed into our yard, the message, the absolute silence of it all, it didn't sit right. Erin wanted to leave, but we had one more night booked, and a storm was rolling in. Roads up here could get tricky. We decided to stay, but promised to leave first thing in the morning. That night, we kept all the curtains shut and every light on. We didn't speak much, just watched movies, tried to ignore the feeling of pressure in the house. At exactly 3:00 a.m., there was a knock on the back door. Not loud, just a soft, deliberate tap-tap. Erin clutched my arm. We didn't move. The knock came again. I stepped to the door, looked through the small window. No one, just darkness. Then I turned and saw another note had been slipped under the door while we'd been standing in the room. I picked it up slowly. This one was typed the words, perfectly centered. "You're open now. It has begun." My mouth went dry. We didn't sleep at all. By sunrise, we were packed. We drove straight into town, barely speaking. I texted the Airbnb host and asked about the neighbors. She replied 2 hours later, "There's no house next door. That lot's been empty for years." I didn't respond. I just looked at Erin, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. We had been seen. And whatever it was, it hadn't stayed behind. We got home late that night, back to the city, back to streetlights and noise and the comforting chaos of normal life. But it didn't feel normal anymore. For days, we kept waking up at exactly 3:00 a.m. No noise, no movement, just that same heavy stillness we felt in the woods. Erin started having dreams she couldn't remember, but woke from shaking. I kept seeing faint shapes out of the corners of my eyes, but whenever I turned, nothing was there. We didn't tell anyone. Who would believe it? There were no photos, no proof, just a folded note I kept hidden in a drawer and a memory I couldn't unsee. A week later, another letter came in the mail. No return address. Just one sentence on clean white paper: "Your offering has been accepted." I didn't show Erin. I burned it in the sink. But some nights I still hear whispering in the walls, and I know it's not over. Story 3. The Man in the Basement. I used to think the scariest part of staying in a stranger's house was what might happen outside someone breaking in a wild animal, a freak storm. But after what happened last spring, I realized the real danger might already be inside with you. Hidden, waiting. We had rented the house for a long weekend, 5 of us college friends catching up after months apart. The place was beautiful, tucked in a quiet wooded neighborhood just outside a small town in Oregon. The host, Greg, seemed normal, polite in texts, gave us the access code, said he would not be around. Everything felt perfect at first. The kitchen was fully stocked, the beds were neatly made, and the house even smelled like fresh pine. But on the second night, I woke up around 3 in the morning and saw someone standing in the hallway just outside my door. And that was when everything started to unravel. We had arrived on a Thursday afternoon, all of us eager for a break from work and routine. There was me, Rachel, DeAndre, Elise, and Marcus. We met back in college, scattered to different cities after graduation, but still made an effort to reconnect every few months. Elise had found the Airbnb 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, a finished basement, and a big stone fireplace in the living room. It was tucked away at the edge of a sleepy little town called Hollow Pines. The photos looked great, and the price was surprisingly reasonable. Greg, the host, had good reviews and communicated clearly, if a little formally. He told us we had the place to ourselves and that there would be no need to meet in person. That suited us fine. When we arrived, everything looked just like the pictures. The house was warm and cozy with homey touches, quilted pillows, candles by the fireplace, and a big bowl of individually wrapped candies on the kitchen counter. The key was in a lockbox, just as promised. We unpacked, quickly picked rooms, and spent the evening drinking wine and playing card games by the fire. It felt like the kind of weekend we all needed. The kind where you let your guard down, where laughter comes easy, where nothing bad could possibly happen. Looking back, I think that first night lulled us into a false sense of comfort. Because by the next evening, we would all wish we had paid more attention to the little things we had overlooked. The first red flag came the next morning, though none of us called it that at the time. Elise was rummaging through the kitchen looking for a spatula when she opened one of the lower drawers and froze. Is it weird that there's like personal stuff in here, she asked. We all gathered around. Inside the drawer were scattered receipts, a checkbook, and a small Ziploc bag filled with loose change. Not unusual for someone's house, but strange for a rental that claimed to be used exclusively for guests. Marcus shrugged it off. Maybe the guy lived here part-time. But the more we looked, the more we found. Shoes tucked neatly in the hall closet. Bottled medications labeled Greg Holloway in the bathroom. Even a set of keys and a wallet sitting on top of the fridge. The weirdest part, a PlayStation 5 was still hooked up to the TV in the living room, logged into someone's account. Why would you leave all this behind? Rachel asked quietly. Doesn't make sense. Still, no one said anything more. We laughed nervously, made breakfast, and brushed it off. But a part of me kept wondering if Greg wasn't planning to stay here. Why did it still feel so much like his home? That night, the unease started to grow. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just the kind of subtle tension that creeps in when your brain starts connecting dots you don't want it to. The house creaked more than it had the night before. The heating made soft knocking sounds through the pipes. Around midnight, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I thought I heard the front door rattle. I got up, padded down the hallway in my socks, and peeked around the corner. The door was closed, locked. Nothing seemed out of place. I chalked it up to nerves and went back to bed. But I couldn't sleep. At 3:47 a.m., I woke again, this time with a full bladder. Groggy and annoyed, I sat up and quietly opened my door. The hallway was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the nightlight near the stairs. That's when I saw him. A man crouched near Elise's bedroom door. Stocky build, wearing a hoodie face, turned slightly away. For a moment, he didn't see me. I froze. My heart felt like it stopped. Then slowly he turned and looked right at me. No fear, no surprise, just calm recognition, like he'd been expecting me. I flicked on the hallway light and yelled, "Hey!" The man straightened quickly, backing away. Rachel's door flew open. Marcus came running out. Elise opened her door and screamed when she saw him just feet away. "Wait, wait!" the man shouted, raising his hands. "I'm Greg. I'm the host." The words felt like ice. Greg, the host, in the house, at nearly 4 in the morning. We crowded into the hallway, yelling over each other. He looked panicked, bare feet on the carpet, sweat on his brow. "I left some tools in the basement," he stammered. "I thought I could just grab them without bothering anyone." But that wasn't the whole truth. Not even close. We didn't let him leave right away. Marcus made him sit on the couch while Rachel called the local police, and I got through to Airbnb support. Greg kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, that he lived downstairs only when the house wasn't booked, and he must have mixed up the schedule. But that didn't explain why the padlock on the basement door, one we hadn't been able to open, was now hanging loose. Or why he had no shoes on, or why he had been crouching at Elise's door instead of grabbing tools. DeAndre pointed it out bluntly, and Greg just kept shaking his head, muttering, "I didn't mean anything by it." The police arrived 20 minutes later. One officer took our statements, while the other pulled Greg into the kitchen for a hushed conversation. Legally, it got murky. Greg owned the home, but the listing claimed exclusive access to the whole house. Nowhere did it say the host would be sleeping in the basement during your stay. Eventually, the officer advised Greg to leave the property for the rest of the weekend. He agreed, collected a small duffel bag from the basement, and walked out into the night without another word. After he left the house, felt different, like a curtain had been pulled back on something we weren't meant to see. Elise sat curled up on the couch, shaking. "He was in here the whole time," she whispered. And the worst part, we all knew she was right. We just didn't know for how long. We didn't stay another night. The next morning, we packed in silence and left before the sun fully rose. Elise cried in the car. No one said much. Once we got home, we each filed reports with Airbnb. Greg's listing was taken down a few days later, and we heard through support that he'd been permanently banned from the platform. Whether any real charges were filed, we never found out. We joked about it months later, called him Basement Goblin Greg, like it was some twisted campfire story. But none of us really laughed. Not for real. There's something about knowing someone was watching you sleep, breathing the same air, walking the same floors while pretending to be gone. I haven't used Airbnb since. I can't. Not because I think every host is like Greg, but because you never really know who's already inside. And you won't realize it until it's far too late. Story 4. The Watching Stranger. At first, we thought he was just a quiet neighbor. The kind of person who liked to keep to himself, maybe a little odd, but harmless. We were wrong. My partner and I had rented a small cabin in the foothills of Huron Ridge, just outside Asheville, hoping for a quiet weekend away from the city. The cabin backed up to a thicket of trees, with one other house barely visible through the brush. We didn't think much of it. until our second night, when the porch light from that neighboring house flicked on, and we saw him for the first time. A man standing at the edge of his yard, completely still staring directly at us. No dog, no cigarette, no movement. Just watching. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just out for air. But that night, as we drew the curtains, I saw him again, closer this time, and still staring. That was when the dread began. We had driven up Friday afternoon, hoping to unwind after a long stretch of nonstop work. I'm a graphic designer. My partner Jamie is a teacher, and we'd both been running on fumes. The Airbnb listing had caught our eye. Secluded woodland retreat, it said, with photos of a cozy A-frame cabin nestled among trees, no shared spaces, and total privacy. The host, Lisa, had dozens of glowing reviews and sent us a friendly welcome message with clear instructions and a digital lock code. When we arrived, the place was even better than we'd hoped. Clean modern with a large back deck and windows that overlooked the woods. The air smelled like pine and fresh rain. We unpacked, opened a bottle of wine, and watched the sunset from the deck, letting the silence wrap around us. It wasn't until we noticed the neighboring house barely visible through the trees that we remembered we weren't completely alone. It was a small one-story home with dark siding and a single porch light. No car in the driveway, no signs of life. Jamie joked that it looked like the kind of place where nothing good ever happens in movies. I laughed it off. Just a quiet neighbor, probably retired. We didn't see anyone that first day, and after a long soak in the tub and a movie, we went to bed relaxed, happy, unaware that by the next evening we'd be drawing every curtain shut and watching the woods, like something might crawl out of them. The first red flag came the next night, just after sunset. We were sitting on the back deck again, wrapped in a blanket, sipping wine, and talking about maybe extending the trip by a day. That's when the porch light on the neighboring house flicked on. We both turned to look. A man had stepped outside, tall, wearing a dark jacket, his face mostly in shadow. He didn't move, didn't walk anywhere. He just stood there right at the edge of his porch facing us. At first, I figured he was letting a dog out, or maybe having a smoke, but there was no dog, no cigarette, no phone in his hand. Just stillness. Jamie whispered, "He's looking at us." I shrugged, trying to play it off. Maybe he's just stretching his legs. But as I looked closer, I realized something unsettling. He wasn't just looking in our direction. His head was tilted slightly downward and his body completely still, like someone holding their breath. After a minute, he turned and walked back inside. The porch light stayed on. Jamie didn't say anything else, and we both went back inside, suddenly aware of how thin the cabin's windows felt. I pulled the curtains shut and tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. That night, neither of us slept well. Jamie kept tossing and turning, and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds I couldn't name. Around 2 a.m, I heard something, a faint rustling outside, like footsteps brushing against leaves. I got out of bed quietly and went to the living room window, careful not to disturb the curtain too much. The moonlight gave the woods a pale blue hue, and for a moment, everything looked still. Then I saw him again. The man. But this time he wasn't on his porch. He was in our yard, standing just beyond the reach of the deck, light half concealed by the trees. He wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything. Just watching. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back quickly, heart pounding. Jamie stirred in the bedroom, and I rushed in to tell her. Together we crept back to the window. He was still there, still facing the house, still completely motionless. We locked every door, double-checked the windows, and sat on the couch with a kitchen knife and a flashlight between us. After 20 minutes, I peeked again. He was gone. No movement, no sound. Just the yard and the trees, and the buzzing silence pressing in. We didn't know whether to call the police. What would we say? A man stood in our yard and did nothing. Eventually, we drifted into a shallow, anxious sleep with the light still on. The next morning, we tried to tell ourselves it was weird, but maybe harmless. Some strange local habit or a lonely guy trying to make awkward conversation. But then, while we were packing a picnic to go hiking, I noticed something on Jamie's phone. A notification from the Bluetooth speaker we had used the night before. It had tried to connect with an unknown device at 2:14 a.m. We weren't using it then. Neither of us had touched it. That was when I stopped trying to make excuses. Someone had tried to get in. Maybe not through the door, but in some other way. That evening, we decided not to go out. We stayed inside with the curtains drawn, lights on in every room, and a movie playing at low volume just to drown out the silence. Every creak, every gust of wind made us tense. By 10:30, we were in bed, fully clothed with a flashlight on the nightstand and a kitchen knife tucked under the edge of the blanket. Around midnight, I heard it again, footsteps. Not leaves this time, but the hollow thump of someone stepping onto the wooden deck. I held my breath. Jamie whispered, "Is he back?" I slid out of bed and inched toward the window. I barely lifted the corner of the curtain. He was there, standing directly on our deck just outside the living room window. His face wasn't visible, but I could see the outline of his body lit faintly by the glow from inside. What chilled me most wasn't that he was watching it, was how calmly he moved, like he had done this before. He raised his phone again, but not to his ear. He pointed it at the window, steady like he was recording us. I ducked back and called 911, whispering to the dispatcher. As I did, the man suddenly turned his head, as if he had heard me. His posture shifted slightly, like he was considering coming closer. Then, just as headlights crested the distant road, he turned and walked away, slow, unbothered, like he had all the time in the world. The sheriff's deputy arrived about 20 minutes later. We showed him where the man had stood, pointed toward the neighboring house, and explained everything. He walked over, knocked on the door, but no one answered. "We'll file a report," he said. "Let your Airbnb host know. And keep your phones close tonight, just in case." Not exactly comforting. The next morning, we packed up before sunrise. Jamie called the host, Lisa, and told her everything. She sounded genuinely shocked, said she'd never had a complaint like that before, and promised to look into it. I left a private note through Airbnb describing the incident, vague enough not to get flagged, but clear enough to warn someone. We never found out who that man was or what he wanted. But even now, months later, I still wake sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced there's someone just outside the window. And when I look, I always expect to see him standing there. Story 5. The Girl in the Treehouse. My daughter said she made a new friend the first night we arrived. At the time, I thought it was sweet. We had just pulled into the Airbnb we rented for the weekend, a quaint little home with a big wraparound porch and a backyard that backed up to a patch of woods. There was a swing set, a treehouse, and enough space for our kids to run wild without us worrying. It felt like a much-needed break from city life. The air was fresh, the yard was quiet, and the neighbors were far enough away that we couldn't hear a thing. But that first night, Sophie, our 6-year-old, told us her new friend had long black hair, a white dress, and liked to sit in the treehouse after dark. She said the girl never talked, just stared. I thought it was her imagination. Kids make things up. But by the end of the trip, I realized that girl had never left the treehouse, and she had never been alone. We'd been needing a break for months. Work had drained both me and my wife Rachel, and the kids Eli, 7, and Sophie, 6, had been climbing the walls ever since school let out. When my cousin Marlon told me about a quiet Airbnb he and his wife had stayed at upstate, we jumped at the chance. The listing called it the Pine Grove House, located in a little town named Whisper Pines, just 3 hours north of Durham. It wasn't remote exactly, but tucked far enough back from the main road that it felt secluded. The photos showed a charming older home with creaky wood floors, a rustic kitchen, and a big fenced backyard with a swing set and a weathered old treehouse built into a crooked pine. The kids were obsessed from the moment they saw it. We arrived late Friday afternoon under gray skies. The owner had left a handwritten note on the counter welcoming us, encouraging us to use the board games in the closet, and reminding us to leave a review. The key had been in a locked box, just as promised. The interior had that lived-in feel, not fancy, but warm. Creaking floorboards, floral curtains, a couch so soft it swallowed you. It smelled like lemon cleaner, and something older underneath, maybe cedar or mothballs. That first evening, we watched a movie together and made popcorn. Rachel and I opened a bottle of wine after the kids went to bed. It felt good, familiar, normal. But when Sophie came downstairs the next morning talking about the girl in the tree, I started paying closer attention. The next morning, the kids were up before us, already outside by the time I finished pouring coffee. I stepped out onto the back porch and saw them near the treehouse. Eli was climbing the rope ladder, and Sophie was sitting on the swing, gently rocking back and forth with her stuffed llama in her lap. She said the swing used to creak louder, Sophie said as I approached. I smiled, assuming she was talking to her brother, but Eli was already halfway up the treehouse. "Who said that, sweetheart?" I asked. Sophie looked at me completely serious. "The girl who lives up there. She doesn't like loud noises." I paused, then crouched down beside her. "What girl?" She pointed toward the treehouse. She has dark hair and a white dress. She was watching me from up there last night. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Maybe it was a dream," she shook her head. She smiled at me, but she doesn't talk. I glanced up at the treehouse. The windows were empty, still dark from within. But something about the way Sophie said it, so matter-of-fact, so casual, made a chill crawl up the back of my neck. I didn't say anything more, but I kept my eyes on that treehouse the rest of the day. That afternoon, we explored the town. Whisper Pines was small, 2 diners, a gas station, and a handful of shops with hand-painted signs. Everyone seemed friendly in that vague, distant way you expect from small towns. At a local coffee shop, Rachel mentioned to the barista that we were staying at the Pine Grove House. The woman's smile faltered for just a second. "That place still listed," she said almost under her breath. Rachel nodded slowly. The woman gave a short, awkward laugh. "Stayed there once, long time ago. Kept hearing things at night. Thought I was losing my mind." Then she changed the subject and asked if we wanted our coffee hot or iced. Back at the house, things started to feel off. The front door was cracked open when we returned, though I was sure I'd locked it. The overhead lights flickered twice before Rachel lit a few candles. "Old wiring," I said, but I didn't believe it. That night we played a board game in the living room by candlelight. Sophie beat us all laughing hysterically. For a moment, everything felt normal again, until I noticed the swing outside moving. It was gentle, just barely swaying. There was no wind. "Did someone open the door?" I asked. Rachel looked up. "No, I locked it earlier. I double-checked. I walked over and shut it tight." 20 minutes later, the power went out completely. pitch black except for the candles. Rachel and I both froze. "Okay," she said, standing up. "That's not funny." "I didn't do anything," I replied, grabbing my phone. A few minutes later, Eli ran inside, pale and shaking. "Dad," he whispered on the verge of tears, "there's someone in the treehouse." I ran out into the yard, flashlight in hand. The swing set was empty, still swaying. I climbed the rope ladder, heart hammering in my chest. Nothing. Just dust cobwebs and an old beanbag chair in the corner. But the air up there, it felt wrong. Like I had walked into a room that didn't want me there. And suddenly, I wasn't sure we were alone anymore. That night, after the kids went to bed, Rachel and I sat at the kitchen table in candlelight, barely speaking. The house felt different, heavier somehow, like the walls were holding their breath. Around 2 a.m., I woke again. This time, it wasn't whispers or flickering lights. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate ones in the hallway just outside our bedroom. I held my breath, eyes wide in the dark, straining to hear. The steps stopped right outside the door. I waited, frozen. Nothing. No knock. No sound. I got up quietly, opened the door, and found the hallway empty. But when I reached the living room, the front door was wide open again, letting in the cold night air. I stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand, and swept it across the yard. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded. But when I turned back to go inside, I glanced toward the treehouse. A pale shape was visible at the window just for a second. A small face, dark hair watching. It vanished before I could blink. I shut the door, locked it tight, and jammed a chair beneath the handle. In the morning, I told Rachel. She just stared at me and said, "I saw her too." Her voice was barely a whisper. In the hallway, she was watching me. That's when I knew it wasn't just the kids seeing things. We were all being watched. And whatever it was, it didn't want us to leave. Not yet. We didn't say anything to the kids. We told them we were leaving early because of a change in plans. They didn't argue. They packed quietly, almost like they sensed something too. As we loaded the car, Sophie stood at the edge of the porch, staring at the treehouse. "She's still sitting there," she said softly. I turned, heart pounding, but saw nothing, just the old wood, the swing swaying once in the windless air. On the drive home, no one spoke for miles. The closer we got to the city, the lighter I felt, like something was peeling off my skin. I never left a review. I couldn't. What would I even write? That there's something in the treehouse that never left, something still waiting. We haven't been back since. But sometimes at night, I find Sophie talking in her sleep. And every time she says the same thing. She says she remembers me. Story 6. The duplicate booking. I thought it was just a mix-up. A booking error, maybe. That was the only explanation that made sense when the knock came on the cabin door and a group of strangers stood on the porch claiming they had rented the place too. I had arrived at the Airbnb that afternoon, alone, ready for a peaceful weekend in the mountains to clear my head. The check-in was smooth, the key was where it should be, and everything inside matched the photos exactly. I was halfway through unpacking when the knock came, 3 sharp raps, firm but not aggressive. I opened the door expecting a delivery or maybe a neighbor. Instead, I found 4 people, 2 men and 2 women, all carrying bags and looking confused. "Hey, one of them said, smiling, "We're here for the weekend. Is this the Birch Hollow cabin?" It was. But I was already inside. And as it turned out, I was already being watched. The place was supposed to be mine for 3 nights. I had booked it weeks in advance, a solo getaway, to escape the noise, the emails, the exhaustion of life in the city. The Birch Hollow cabin was small, but charming, tucked deep into a pine forest, about 30 minutes outside a town called Redford. The listing had advertised it as perfect for reflection and reset, and that was exactly what I needed. No TV, no internet, just quiet. The host, someone named Darren, had been responsive over the app. He sent clear directions, a 4-digit door code, and said to enjoy the solitude. I arrived just after 3 in the afternoon, the gravel driveway crunching under my tires. The air smelled like damp earth and cedar. Inside, the place was clean wood floors, plaid couch, a tiny fireplace, still stacked with unused logs. I unpacked, slowly letting the silence settle in. By 5, I was standing in the kitchen when the knock came. When I opened the door and saw those 4 strangers standing there, my first instinct was that they must be confused, but they weren't. They showed me a confirmation email that looked almost identical to mine. Same dates, same address. The only difference was the name on their host's profile. A woman named Danielle. We stood awkwardly on the porch for a moment, everyone trying to make sense of it. Then one of them asked, "Is there anyone else staying here with you?" That question should have felt normal, but something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. I told them no, I was alone. The guy who asked just nodded, but the others exchanged quick glances. They didn't look surprised, more like they were confirming something. I stepped out onto the porch, trying to stay polite but firm. "Look, I'm sure this is just a mix-up with the platform," I said. "Maybe a double booking or a cloned listing." The woman with the curly hair offered a tight smile. "Yeah, that makes sense," she said. "We'll just call Airbnb and figure it out." But none of them made a move to pull out a phone. That was the first red flag. The second came when I offered to let them wait in their car while they sorted it out, and they told me they didn't drive. I glanced down the gravel road behind them. No vehicle, no tire tracks. The woods were thick on both sides. "So how did you get up here?" I asked. The second man, taller than the rest, said, "We walked." That made no sense. The nearest town was over 5 miles away, and none of them looked winded or even dusty. That was when the feeling hit me, like I was no longer the one in control of the situation. Like I was the one who had been expected. I told them I needed a moment to check my booking and stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking. I pulled up my reservation. It was still there, still active, and under the host named Darren. Everything matched. I tried messaging him through the app, but it just showed a spinning icon. No response. I peeked out through the side curtain. The group was still standing there, not talking, just waiting. Not fidgeting, not pacing, just still. That's what unnerved me most. I dialed Airbnb support, but the signal was weak and the call dropped after the automated greeting. I tried again. Same thing. My stomach turned. I started packing, grabbing my keys, wallet, chargers, something deep in me saying it was time to go. That's when I heard it. A soft knock. Not at the front door this time, at the back. I froze. This cabin only had one way in by road. I moved to the rear window, slowly peeled back the curtain. The tall man from the group was standing at the back porch now, alone. Closer, he looked directly at me, not startled in the least, like he knew exactly where I'd be. I backed away and checked the windows locked. Door locked. My heart was pounding. I reached for my phone again and tried calling 911, but there was no service at all now. Just a red bar across the top of the screen. I stepped into the bedroom to grab my bag and stopped cold. One of them had placed something on the bed. A Polaroid photo. It was me taken through the living room window. I hadn't heard anyone come in. I hadn't seen a flash. I hadn't seen a camera. My hands went numb. They hadn't just arrived. They had been here, watching, waiting, long before they ever knocked on the door. I grabbed my bag and bolted. Didn't check for shoes, didn't double lock anything. Just sprinted through the front door and down the gravel road, heart slamming against my ribs. The group was gone. No sign of them on the porch, no voices behind me, only the crunch of gravel under my feet and the shrill wheeze of my breath. I didn't stop running for nearly half a mile until I reached the bend in the road where the tree cover opened up and my signal bars flickered back to life. I dialed 911, and this time, it rang. I barely got the words out. Airbnb people I didn't know. No car photo of me in the house. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was. A patrol car was already in the area. That struck me as odd, but I didn't care. I sat on a fallen log, shaking, staring back down the road. 20 minutes later, a deputy arrived. I told him everything. He listened quietly, then asked me to describe the 4 people. As I spoke, I saw something shift in his eyes. Recognition. When I finished, he said something I'll never forget. We found a car like yours up there 2 months ago, parked outside Birch Hollow, same host name, but the man never checked out. We never found him. His voice lowered. You should come with me now. And in that moment, I understood I wasn't the first. I might not have even been the intended guest. They never found the 4 people I described. No prints, no tracks, no record of a host named Danielle on any platform. Darren's profile vanished the next day, like it had never existed. Airbnb called once, asked if I wanted a refund. I didn't answer. I moved out of my apartment 3 weeks later and relocated to a building with 24-hour security and cameras in every hallway. I haven't booked another rental since. But sometimes in the early hours of the morning, I still wake up with the sense that someone's watching. Not a dream, not paranoia. Just that cold, crawling certainty in your spine. Once a letter arrived at my new place. No return address. Just a folded Polaroid of me sitting in the cabin kitchen, time-stamped hours before I arrived. I burned it in the sink. But I can still feel it. That moment before the knock. The sense that someone is already inside, waiting for the right time to say hello. Story 7. The Basement Whispers. It was supposed to be a simple favor watch my cousin's Airbnb for the weekend while she was out of town. Water the plants, bring in the mail, make sure no pipes froze. She promised it would be easy. You'll have the whole place to yourself, she said. Just don't go into the basement. It's locked anyway. That last part felt like a joke. Every old house has a quirk. I didn't think twice. The first night was uneventful. I made dinner, watched TV, and fell asleep on the couch. But around 3 in the morning, I heard a noise. A faint metallic scraping, like something dragging against concrete. It was coming from below me, from the basement. I told myself it was the house settling, maybe a water heater kicking on. But the sound came again, sharper this time, closer. And then, impossibly, I heard someone whisper my name from behind the locked basement door. My cousin Tessa had owned the place for about 6 months. It was an old Victorian on the edge of town, 2 stories, creaky floors, big bay windows, the kind of place that looked like it had secrets. She had done a great job fixing it up, turning it into a charming little Airbnb that booked fast because of its cozy, historic vibe. I had visited once before, but this was my first time staying overnight. Tessa had left a printed sheet with instructions, Wi-Fi, password, thermostat, settings, trash pickup. At the very bottom in her handwriting, she had added one last note: seriously, don't open the basement door. I lost the key. It sticks anyway. The door was at the far end of the hallway, just past the kitchen. Thick old wood with iron hinges and a tarnished brass knob. It blended into the house's style, and I figured it probably just led to old pipes or a storage area full of paint cans and cobwebs. The first day went exactly as expected. I brought in the mail, watered the plants, took a nap, and cooked dinner. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, but I chalked that up to being alone in a big space. That night, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and a movie, and at some point, I must have drifted off. The next thing I knew, it was 3:08 a.m., and something downstairs was scraping across the floor beneath me. Then I heard it again, closer this time. My name whispered slowly, intimately, from behind the locked basement door. I sat there frozen, every hair on my arms standing straight up. I strained to hear more, hoping somehow that it had been a dream or a trick of the old house. But the house was dead silent now, the kind of stillness that makes your breath sound too loud. I got up slowly and crept toward the hallway. The basement door looked the same, as always, locked, unmoving, but I swear I felt something on the other side. A presence. Not movement exactly. More like pressure. Like the air was thicker around that door. I placed my ear against it, heart pounding so hard I could barely think. Nothing. Just silence. I almost laughed, trying to shake it off, blaming the creaky old place and my overactive imagination. But when I turned to head back, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A long, thin scratch running across the floorboards, starting directly in front of the basement door and stopping just inches from where I'd been sleeping. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I was sure of it. It was the moment I knew something wasn't right, and that whatever had whispered my name, it hadn't stayed behind the door. Not entirely. I barely slept after that. I sat upright on the couch with every light on, clutching my phone and refreshing the Airbnb app, trying to contact Tessa. No response. I told myself I'd leave in the morning, pack up, and just say I got sick. But as the sun came up and the light filled the house, the fear began to feel ridiculous. Paranormal paranoia brought on by shadows and sleep deprivation. That's what I told myself. I made coffee, cleaned up, even laughed a little at how worked up I had gotten. But when I went to the kitchen, something stopped me cold. The basement door was slightly ajar. Just a crack. Wide enough to prove I hadn't imagined the noise. Pulse roared in my ears. I hadn't touched the door. I hadn't even gone near it. I approached slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. I nudged it closed and tested the knob. It wouldn't lock. It just spun loosely. I wedged a heavy chair against it and walked away, determined not to think about it. But the house had changed. I started noticing small things that weren't right. A spoon in the sink I hadn't used. A light on upstairs I didn't remember turning on. At one point, the shower curtain in the guest bathroom was drawn closed, and I never closed it. I yanked it open. Nothing. No one. But the mirror was fogged up like someone had just been inside. That night, the whispers came back. I was in bed with the door shut, headphones on, trying to drown it all out. But through the music, I heard it again. My name. Closer now. From the hallway. I shut the music off and listened. There was a soft creak of footsteps, slow and deliberate. Something dragging against the wall. I forced myself to check every part of me, screaming not to. The hallway was empty, but at the end of it, the basement door was open again. This time wide. Waiting. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring into that dark opening. The light from the kitchen cast a faint glow across the top of the stairs, but the rest vanished into blackness. I couldn't see the bottom. I couldn't hear anything. But I could feel it. Something down there was waiting. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, clicked it on, and aimed it into the basement. The beam caught dust particles swirling in the air, dancing like they'd been disturbed recently. I took one step down, then another. The stairs creaked under my weight. The air grew colder with each step. Halfway down, the smell hit me, damp earth rust and something faintly sweet like rotting fruit. I reached the bottom, heart hammering, and swept the light across the room. Shelves lined the walls, packed with boxes and tools. But then I saw a small chair in the center of the room facing the wall. On it sat a tape recorder. No dust. Recently used. I stepped closer and hit play. A voice crackled through the static. My voice, saying my name, whispering it again and again, over and over, slower each time. I dropped the recorder. It hit the ground and kept playing. Behind me, I heard footsteps at the top of the stairs. Slow, deliberate. The door creaked shut and everything went dark. That was when I understood I had never been alone in that house. And something had been calling me there the entire time. I don't remember how I got out. Just flashes the door slamming open. Me running through the dark gravel, crunching beneath my feet, breath burning in my chest. I called Tessa once I reached my car, hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. She answered groggy, and when I told her what happened, there was a long silence. Then she whispered, I thought it had stopped. I never asked what she meant. I didn't want to know. I drove straight home that night and haven't spoken to her since. She took the listing down the next day. No explanation, no apology. Just gone. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I hear my name whispered faintly through the walls of my apartment. Always just once. Always at 3:08 a.m., and every time I check the door to the basement garage. Just to be sure it's still locked, just to make sure nothing followed me back. Story 8. The Thing by the Lake. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that makes your ears ring. The cabin was supposed to be a weekend escape, a retreat, deep in the northern woods. No cell service, no distractions, just me, my journal, and some time alone. It was beautiful in a rugged way, perched beside a still lake, with fog that clung to the water like a living thing. The Airbnb host had left a note on the table. Make yourself at home. Don't worry about the noises at night. The forest has its rhythms. I thought it was just a quirky touch. Local flavor. But that night, I learned what he meant. Around midnight, the sounds began. Not animals, not trees. Footsteps, pacing, circling the cabin. Always staying just out of sight. I didn't see anything at first, but I felt it. Watching, waiting. Something out there knew I was alone. I had been looking forward to the trip for weeks. After a brutal quarter at work and the end of a long relationship, I needed time to breathe, to think. The listing promised seclusion. No neighbors, no internet, just a solar-powered cabin beside a lake in the middle of a dense pine forest. The host, someone named Will, had glowing reviews and responded quickly when I booked. He sent over detailed instructions about the drive and how to use the wood-burning stove, where to find extra blankets. You'll love it out here, he wrote. Peace like this is hard to find. He was right about that. The drive was long, the roads winding and narrow. I didn't pass a single car for the last hour of the trip. But when I arrived, the cabin was everything I had hoped for, rustic quiet, with huge windows facing the lake and a wraparound deck that creaked with age. I unpacked, lit a fire, and made a simple dinner. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional crack of wood in the stove and the distant hoot of an owl. I read until the light faded, then stepped outside to breathe in the cold night air. That's when I heard it for the first time. Footsteps, slow and steady. Not on gravel or leaves, but on the deck itself, just around the corner from where I stood. I spun around, but no one was there. Just trees, darkness, and that unbearable silence pressing in again. I went back inside quickly, locking the door behind me. I tried to shake it off, maybe an animal, a raccoon, or a deer brushing the deck. But something about the sound didn't fit. The steps had weight, rhythm, intent. I kept the lights on and made some tea to calm my nerves. As I sat at the table, I glanced out the big window facing the woods. That's when I saw it. A handprint. Not on the glass itself, but in the condensation on the outside near the bottom corner. Small, human, fresh. I hadn't noticed it before, and I'd been standing near that window just an hour earlier. Chest tightened. I turned off the lights inside to cut the glare and scanned the trees beyond the window. Nothing moved. But the longer I looked, the more I was sure someone had been standing there, watching me from just a few feet away. I slept with the light on that night and a fire poker next to the bed. I told myself it was just a weird coincidence. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't alone. Someone or something was out there. And it wasn't done with me yet. The next morning brought a weak gray light and a brief sense of relief. I convinced myself I had overreacted. Sleep deprivation, isolation. The eeriness of the woods, it could all mess with your head. I walked the perimeter of the cabin looking for tracks, but the ground was too frozen to hold prints. No signs of wildlife, no broken branches. Just the still lake unmoving as glass and the woods looming behind it like a wall. I spent most of the day inside, reading by the fire and trying to relax. By late afternoon, I had nearly convinced myself it had all been nothing. Then I found the note. It wasn't on the counter where the host's welcome card had been. It was slid just under the door, written on the back of one of my own notebook pages. The handwriting was shaky, childlike. It said only 2 words, "Stay inside." My hands went cold. I hadn't written it. I hadn't used my notebook yet. I searched the cabin, every drawer, every closet, even the tiny attic crawl space. Nothing. No one. But that night, the noises returned. Louder. Closer. Around midnight, I heard footsteps again, this time running across the deck fast and heavy, circling the cabin over and over. I held my breath, peeking through the window. I saw a shape dart past the edge of the trees, not an animal. Human. Too fast, too silent. Then something hit the back door. Hard. I grabbed the fire poker and backed into the bedroom. The door handle rattled once, twice, then stopped. Total silence. For nearly an hour, I didn't move. When I finally crept back out to the main room, the back door was ajar. On the floor was another note folded neatly. I picked it up with shaking hands. This one had more words. "You are not alone. You were never alone. Don't look at the lake." Of course, that's exactly what I did. And that's when I saw the shape standing perfectly still on the frozen shore. Watching, unmoving, waiting. I stared through the glass, heart-thudding breath fogging up the window. The figure didn't move. It was tall, unnaturally thin, draped in something dark that fluttered slightly in the breeze. I couldn't make out a face, just the impression of eyes, hollow and fixed, directly on me. I stepped back instinctively, nearly tripping over the rug. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but to where the road was miles away, the woods were thicker than ever, and night had swallowed everything. I grabbed my bag phone and the fire poker, then barricaded the doors and windows with furniture. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the screws on the locks. Every few minutes, I would peek outside. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, always facing the cabin. The final straw came around 3 a.m., when I turned from the window for just a second, and when I looked back, it was gone. Not a sound, not a trace. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I sat by the door, poker in hand, until light crept through the trees. As soon as it was bright enough, I ran. Didn't pack, didn't look back. I drove for nearly an hour before I even checked my phone. No new messages, no signal. But there in the Notes app was a draft I didn't write. Just one line. Looking at it lets it in. I never reported it. What could I say that something followed me out of the woods, that a shape stood at the edge of a frozen lake and left messages in my phone? I deleted the draft, blocked the host's number, and never opened the Airbnb app again. Weeks passed. I tried to forget. But sometimes just before sleep, I still hear the footsteps slow, circling outside my apartment window, even though I live on the 3rd floor. A month after I left the cabin, I got a package. No return address. Inside was a photo, black and white. A picture of the lake, perfectly still mist, curling at the edges. In the background, faint but unmistakable, was the silhouette of the figure. Same posture, same eyes. Scribbled on the back in that same childlike handwriting were 3 words. You looked again. I haven't dared to since. But some nights I feel it watching, still waiting. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.